What happens when your family turns on you and leaves you fighting for your life? Emily had just earned her promotion at work, a dream realized after years of hard work and sacrifice. A simple social media post celebrating her success turned into something she never expected: a phone call from her estranged mother. Suddenly, after 8 years of silence, they wanted to celebrate. But there was a catch. It wasn't about Emily's success, it was about Ashley. Stay tuned to see how Emily uncovers a twisted betrayal and finally chooses to take control of her life. Don't forget to subscribe for more incredible stories. I never imagined that something as simple as a photo could turn my life upside down, but that's exactly what happened last Saturday. There I was, standing next to Mr. Olivier, the company director, both of us smiling as he shook my hand. The caption read, "Finally got that promotion. Hard work pays off. Career milestone." See, it seemed like just another career update to share on social media, a small personal victory I didn't think much about. Little did I know how wrong I was. My name is Emily, and at 24, I had finally gotten my first big break at Marshall & Associates. I'd worked my way up from an entry-level manager to department head. It wasn't easy. I spent 4 years working overtime, giving countless presentations, and drinking more coffee than I care to admit. But I did it on my own, and that meant everything to me. I was still basking in the excitement of my promotion when my phone buzzed. The number wasn't saved, but I recognized it instantly. My mother. 8 years of silence, and now, suddenly, she was calling me. My hand trembled as I stared at the screen. "Hello?" I answered, my voice coming out softer than I wanted. "Emily, sweetheart." My mother's voice exactly as I remembered, sweet but hollow. It was the tone she used when she wanted something. "Your father and I just saw your post. We're so proud of you." Proud. That word hit me like a slap. Where had their pride been when I needed it most? "Thanks," I said, gripping the edge of my desk, trying to steady myself. "We should celebrate. Why don't you come over this weekend? We can throw a proper party for you. The whole family would love to see how successful you've become." The whole family. That meant Ashley, my younger sister, the favorite, the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. I swallowed, my throat tightening. "I'll think about it," I managed to say. "Please, darling, we've missed you so much. It's time to put the past behind us, don't you think?" After we hung up, I sat there, heart pounding. I stared blankly at my desk, trying to calm the storm inside me. 8 years of silence broken by a single social media post. 8 years since I walked out of that house, vowing never to return. 8 years of building a life without them. My hand brushed against the medical alert bracelet on my wrist, the one that warned of my severe peanut allergy. The same allergy my parents had treated like an inconvenience, and Ashley had mocked with her cruel jokes. My grandmother's voice echoed in my mind. "Family is who treats you like family, not just who shares your blood." Grandma had been my real parent. Over the past 8 years, she'd been there for me, supporting me through college, believing in me when no one else did. The words, "proud of you," repeated in my head, and I couldn't help but wonder how those words felt so empty coming from my parents, yet so full of love from Grandma. I glanced at the photo on my desk, me and Grandma at my college graduation. She was smiling, genuinely proud of me, not the hollow pride my parents were suddenly offering. That phone call from Mom had brought everything rushing back. All the old wounds I had tried to bury, and they hurt just as much as they did back then. Ashley, just 4 years younger than me, had always been the shining star of the family. From the moment she was born, everything had revolved around her. I wore clothes from discount stores while Ashley got designer outfits. My parents used expensive cameras to capture her every moment, while my school achievements were shoved into drawers, forgotten. I remember my 11th birthday so clearly. I had been hoping for an art set. I'd seen a simple kit with colored pencils and a sketchbook. It wasn't anything fancy. Instead, I got a pack of number 2 pencils. "You need these for school anyway," Mom said. That same year, for Ashley's 8th birthday, my parents turned the entire backyard into a Disney Princess Wonderland, complete with a hired Cinderella. "Ashley's just more artistic," Mom would say when relatives questioned why they treated us so differently. She needs proper tools to develop her talent. I still remember Aunt Marjorie speaking up at a family dinner. Children should be loved equally. This isn't right. Mom waved her off like it was nothing. Oh, Marjorie, you don't have kids. You wouldn't understand. Our girls are just different. Ashley has real potential. Emily is, well, Emily is just ordinary. We're being realistic about their abilities. The worst part wasn't the gifts or the parties. It was how they made me feel, like I wasn't good enough, like I didn't matter. When I won first place in a state math competition, I expected a congratulations from my mom. Instead, she said, "That's nice, dear, but did you see Ashley's painting? It's displayed in the school hallway." My grandmother saw through it all. "This isn't right, Camille," she would tell my mom. "You're raising one child to feel entitled and the other to feel worthless." "Please, Mom," my mother would respond with an eye roll. "Ashley is gifted. Emily is, well, Emily is just ordinary. We're being realistic about their abilities." See, Ashley quickly learned how to take advantage of her position. If she broke something, she'd blame me, and my parents believed her without question. If she spilled juice on my homework by accident and I got upset, she'd cry, and somehow I'd end up looking like the bad one. Once, she even told her friends not to play with me because I was the boring sister. When I got accepted into the advanced mathematics program at school, Ashley had a small role in a school play. Guess which event my parents went to? I sat alone in the math classroom during the awards ceremony, watching other parents beam with pride at their children. My certificate was signed by my teacher and the principal, but my parents never even saw it. "Your sister needs us more," Dad would say if I tried to tell them how I felt. "She has real talents to nurture. You're more independent." Independent. It wasn't a compliment. It was their excuse for ignoring me. Even our relatives couldn't help but notice what was happening. At family gatherings, the atmosphere would shift whenever Ashley made a dramatic demand for attention or purposely left me out of activities. The adults exchanged awkward glances, uncomfortable with what they were witnessing. But my parents? They acted like they didn't see it, or maybe, more accurately, they chose not to. Life has a way of surprising you when you least expect it. And my surprise came at Grandma's house when I was 13. I had eaten peanut butter countless times before. It was one of my favorite foods, but that day was different. "Want a sandwich, sweetheart?" Grandma asked, her voice warm as she spread her famous peanut butter and honey mix onto the bread. I nodded eagerly, watching her hands work, but within seconds, something was wrong. My throat began to tighten. Breathing became more and more difficult. I remember dropping the sandwich and clutching at my throat, panic rising. What happened next is still blurry in my memory. Grandma's quick thinking saved my life. She immediately recognized the signs of anaphylaxis and called 911. I remember her holding my hand in the ambulance. Her voice was calm, but I could hear the fear lurking beneath it. "Stay with me, sweetheart. Just keep breathing." My parents didn't show up until an hour later at the hospital, and their annoyance was palpable. They were irritated they had to leave work. Mom tapped her foot impatiently as the doctor explained what happened. "She has a severe peanut allergy," the doctor said. "Allergies like this can appear suddenly, even if there were no issues before. She'll need to carry an EpiPen at all times and check food labels carefully. Cross-contamination can be just as dangerous." Dad nodded, but his eyes were glued to his watch. Mom was already typing away on her phone, likely texting Ashley's dance instructor about being late for pickup. The ride home was worse than the hospital. They waited until we were in the car to really show their frustration. "This is just perfect," Mom muttered, as if I were a burden they couldn't afford. "As if we don't have enough to deal with already." Dad sighed. "First the math tutoring, now this. Everything with you has to be so complicated, doesn't it, Emily?" I pressed myself against the car door, shrinking into the seat. My throat still burned from the reaction, but their words cut deeper. The next few years became a careful routine of reading labels, carrying EpiPens everywhere, and praying I wouldn't have another reaction. Grandma made sure I had medical alert bracelets and taught me to speak up about my allergy. She even called the school to explain just how serious it was. Ashley, of course, never missed an opportunity to mock me. She'd wave peanut butter sandwiches in my face, laughing as I flinched. "Oh, sorry," she'd say with a sickly sweet tone, pretending innocence. "I forgot you're allergic to everything now." At family gatherings, she'd shout, "Be careful, everyone! Emily might die if she eats the wrong thing." The awkward laughter that followed made me feel even more like an outsider. And my parents? They never corrected her. If anything, they seemed irritated by the extra attention I needed. I learned to pack my own food, check every label 4 times, and never trust food I hadn't personally checked. It was exhausting, but it became my reality. When I graduated high school, it should have been a moment of triumph. I had earned a full scholarship to Northwestern State University. I had done it all on my own, maintaining straight A's, working part-time jobs, and staying vigilant with my allergy. The acceptance letter felt like proof that all my hard work had paid off. While I stayed up late studying, Ashley's loud music would shake the walls of the house, but now I had something to show for it. The moment I announced my college acceptance is burned into my memory. "I got into Northwestern," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Full academic scholarship." "That's nice, dear," Mom said without looking up from her plate. "The thing is," I continued, gripping my fork tightly, "I'll need help with housing. The scholarship covers tuition, but not accommodation. I've looked into the costs and—" "No." Dad's voice was firm and flat. "You chose to apply to a college in another state. That was your decision. We're saving for Ashley's education. She's planning to go to Riverside in 3 years, and that's not cheap." I stared at my plate, fighting back tears. Across the table, Ashley smirked and twirled her pasta slowly, like she was enjoying the moment. "But it's just the housing cost," I tried again. "The scholarship covers everything else." "Emily," Mom cut in sharply, "we've made our decision. If you want to go to college out of state, you'll have to figure out housing on your own." Right then, the front door opened. Grandma walked in, holding a congratulatory balloon and a small gift bag. Her smile faded as she looked around and saw my red eyes, Ashley's smug face, and my parents' cold expressions. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice calm but firm. Ashley giggled, always ready to make things worse. "Oh, Emily got into college, but she'll be living on the street because Mom and Dad won't pay for housing. They're saving for my Riverside education instead." The room fell silent. Grandma's expression darkened. "Is this true?" she asked quietly, but her voice was sharp. When no one answered, she continued, "Camille, John, how dare you? Your daughter earned a full scholarship and you won't even help her with housing." "Mom, please," my mother sighed. "Ashley's education," Dad added quickly. Grandma's voice rose with anger. "What about Emily's education? What about supporting both your children?" Then she turned to Ashley, who still wore that smug look. "And you," Grandma said, her voice colder now. "You're becoming a cruel, spoiled child. I'm ashamed of how you're behaving." Ashley's face crumpled instantly and burst into tears, her favorite trick when things didn't go her way. Mom and Dad jumped up to comfort her, shooting angry glares at Grandma and me. "This is exactly what we mean," Mom snapped at Grandma. "Emily and you're always causing problems, always making things difficult." Something inside me snapped. I didn't say a word. I just stood up, left the dining room, and climbed the stairs to my bedroom. I grabbed my old duffel bag and began tossing clothes into it. A few minutes later, Grandma appeared in the doorway, her presence steady and comforting. "Pack everything you need, sweetheart. You're coming home with me." "But college," I began, unsure how this would work. "It'll be taken care of," she said firmly. "I'll pay for your housing. You focus on your studies and building your future." 30 minutes later, we walked out of that house together. Behind us, my parents' angry voices and Ashley's fake sobs echoed through the walls. As we stepped outside, a strange feeling washed over me. I was leaving behind the people who had always made me feel small, unwanted. I didn't know what the future would bring, but in that moment, for the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Hope. College life was everything I had dreamed of, and more. My small apartment near campus became my sanctuary, a place where I could breathe without walking on eggshells. Grandma visited often. She never missed a birthday, a holiday, or any special moment in my life. But my parents and Ashley, they became like ghosts. No calls on Christmas, no cards on my birthday, not even a text when I graduated. 8 years of complete silence. So when I found myself standing on their doorstep after that phone call about my promotion, it felt surreal. The house looked the same cream-colored walls, the perfect lawn, the brass door knocker I used to stretch to reach as a child. Mom opened the door, her voice too cheerful. "Emily!" Her tone felt rehearsed, and when she pulled me into a hug, it was stiff and unfamiliar. The living room hadn't changed either. Ashley's achievements still dominated the space. Her Riverside degree hung proudly above the fireplace, the centerpiece of it all. Ashley was sitting in Dad's old armchair, scrolling through her phone. She barely looked up, only rolling her eyes when Mom started gushing about my promotion. "We're so proud of you, sweetheart," Mom kept repeating, the words feeling hollow after 8 years of silence. "Aren't we, John?" Dad nodded from the couch. "Very proud. Moving up in a big company like that. It's impressive." "We need to celebrate properly," Mom continued, her voice shifting into the tone she used when planning Ashley's big events. "A big family gathering right here at the house. Everyone would love to see you. Aunt Marjorie, all your cousins." "And Grandma too?" I asked, my voice pointed, not missing the way she winced. Of course," Mom said quickly, but I saw the slight grimace she tried to hide. "We want to make things right, Emily. It's been too long. How about 3 weeks from now? That'll give everyone time to make arrangements." Every instinct screamed that this was wrong, that it was just another empty gesture, but somehow I found myself nodding. "Sure, that sounds nice." The 3 weeks leading up to the party felt strange. Work kept me busy with my new responsibilities, but my phone buzzed constantly. My suddenly attentive family couldn't stop messaging me. Mom sent daily texts about the party preparations. Ashley, who hadn't spoken to me in years, suddenly sent me a friend request on social media. The message that came with it read, "Time to put the past behind us, sis." Grandma was thrilled. Over one of our weekly dinners, she said, "This is all I've ever wanted, for my family to be whole again." Finally, the day of the party arrived. It was warm and sunny, a perfect day for a gathering. I pulled up to my parents' house and saw cars already lined up along the street. Inside, the house buzzed with activity. Aunt Marjorie's daughter, Megan, was running around with her phone, recording everything like a little documentary filmmaker. The smell of catered food filled the air, and I quickly noticed that everything was nut-free. That was a surprise. Emily, Grandma's warm hug, greeted me first. "You look beautiful, sweetheart." Aunt Marjorie hugged me next. "We're so proud of you, kiddo. Department head at your age, that's incredible." Ashley stood by the stairs wearing a designer dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent. She greeted guests with a perfectly practiced smile, like she was at a beauty pageant. Meanwhile, my parents floated around the house, acting like perfect hosts, as if the last 8 years hadn't happened. When everyone finally sat at the large decorated dining table, Mom stood and clinked her glass for attention. "We're so happy to have everyone here today," she began with a big smile. "As you know, we're celebrating Emily's promotion." She paused as everyone clapped politely. "It's wonderful to see her finally finding her footing in the corporate world." I should have known the word "finally" was a red flag. "And speaking of success," Mom continued, her voice brighter now, "I'd like to take a moment to talk about our Ashley." She launched into a long speech about Ashley's achievements, graduating from Riverside with honors, her artistic talent, and how gifted she was. I sat there, frozen, as Mom finished with, "And now that Emily has this wonderful position and a role in management, we're hoping she can help her incredibly qualified sister join this prestigious company." The table went silent. I felt Grandma's eyes on me and saw Aunt Marjorie shift uncomfortably in her chair. Megan's phone stayed focused on me, recording every painful second. "Actually," I said, my voice steady despite the pressure, "I'm not in a position to hire anyone. I'm a department head, not a director. I don't make hiring decisions." Mom's smile tightened, but she didn't give up. "Surely with your new influence—" "Excuse me," I said, cutting her off as I stood. "Mom, Dad, can we talk privately?" They followed me into the kitchen, and their fake smiles disappeared the moment we were alone. "I thought this was supposed to be a celebration of my promotion," I said quietly, "not a networking event for Ashley." "Don't be selfish, Emily," Mom snapped. "Ashley needs this opportunity. Family helps family." "Selfish?" I repeated, stunned. "After 8 years of silence, you only reach out because you want something from me, and I'm the selfish one?" Dad's face hardened. "We've given Ashley every advantage, invested everything in her future. The least you can do is help your sister now that you're in a position to do so." We walked back to the dining room, the tension trailing behind us like a storm cloud. I sat back down at the table, trying to ignore Grandma and Aunt Marjorie's worried glances. While we were gone, the catering staff had served the main course, some kind of fancy chicken dish with a creamy sauce. I took a couple of bites, my mind still spinning from the conversation in the kitchen. The sauce had an unusual flavor, nutty. Suddenly, my throat felt tight. Panic hit me like a wave as I realized what was happening. "Peanuts!" I gasped, my hand shaking as I grabbed for my purse, fumbling for my EpiPen. "There's peanuts!" The room started to spin. Chairs scraped across the floor and voices rose in panic. Grandma's voice broke through the noise. "Someone call 911!" After that, everything became a blur, shadows, noise, chaos. The last thing I felt was my throat closing and Grandma's hands holding mine. I woke up to the steady beep of hospital monitors. My throat was raw and my body felt heavy. Grandma was sitting beside my bed, her face tired and full of worry. "Oh, thank God," she whispered, leaning closer when she saw my eyes open. "We almost lost you, sweetheart." The doctor said it was one of the worst reactions they've ever seen. I tried to speak, but the pain in my throat was too much. "Don't try to talk yet," Grandma said, squeezing my hand gently. "You've been out for several hours. The EpiPen and the paramedics barely got to you in time." I managed to whisper, "The food." "They knew." Before Grandma could answer, Aunt Marjorie burst into the room, followed closely by Megan. Megan held her phone tightly, her face unusually serious. "Emily," Aunt Marjorie said, her voice shaking with anger. "There's something you need to see. Megan, show her!" Megan stepped forward, her hands trembling as she held out her phone. "I was recording everything at the party," she said quietly. "I caught this when you were in the kitchen with your parents." On the video, the dining room came into view from a spot near the dessert table. I could see myself leaving the room with my parents. A moment later, Ashley stood up, walked over to my place setting, and reached into her designer purse. She pulled out a small jar, stirred something into my food, then sat back down. The smirk on her face was unmistakable. "That's peanut butter," Aunt Marjorie said, her voice hard. "Your sister deliberately put peanut butter in your food, knowing full well about your allergy." I stared at the screen, unable to look away as the scene replayed. Ashley, my own sister, had tried to. She could have killed me. She knew exactly what she was doing. "She knew exactly what she was doing," Grandma said softly, her voice breaking. The room fell silent as we watched the video again. Ashley's actions were so casual, so deliberate, that tiny smirk as she stirred the peanut butter into my food made it clear this wasn't a mistake. It was planned. I left the hospital against the doctor's advice, fueled by a mix of rage and disbelief. The video Megan had sent me felt heavy in my pocket, as though it carried the weight of everything I had just been through. When I pulled up to my parents' house, my hands shook on the steering wheel. Inside, they were all sitting in the living room. Mom, Dad, and Ashley, acting like nothing had happened, as if I had nearly died at their dinner table just hours earlier. "What are you doing here?" Ashley asked, barely looking up from her phone. "Shouldn't you still be at the hospital, being dramatic?" "I know what you did," I said, my voice calm but firm. "I know you put peanut butter in my food." Ashley's head shot up, her face twisting with outrage. "How dare you accuse your sister?" Mom snapped, jumping to her feet. "Haven't you caused enough trouble?" I pulled out my phone, opened the video, and pressed play. The room fell into a heavy silence. The only sound was the video itself. Ashley casually walking to my plate and stirring peanut butter into my food with a smug, self-satisfied smile. The color drained from Ashley's face. Then, unbelievably, she laughed. "Oh, come on, it was just a prank," she said with a shrug. "You're always so serious about everything." A prank? My voice trembled with fury. I could have died. Do you understand that? The doctor said I barely made it. Oh, please, Mom waved her hand dismissively. You're being dramatic. Ashley was just having a bit of fun. Fun? I stared at them, disbelief mixing with the raw anger building in my chest. I had an anaphylactic reaction. My heart nearly stopped. Dad's voice turned cold, calculating, as if this was all just another inconvenience. Listen carefully. If you even think about taking this to the police, you're no longer our daughter. We'll disinherit you completely. In that moment, the truth hit me like a freight train. These people weren't my family. They never had been. Without another word, I turned and walked out. My hands were steady now, a calm resolve replacing the storm of emotions in my chest. I got into my car and drove home, knowing exactly what I had to do. Sitting at my computer, I uploaded the video to my social media. Below it, I wrote, "Today I learned what family truly means, and these people are not it. My sister deliberately poisoned me with peanuts, knowing I have a life-threatening allergy. My parents called it a prank. This is the last time I will ever call them family." The response was immediate, overwhelming. Relatives I hadn't spoken to in years commented in shock, some in anger, others in disbelief. Aunt Marjorie shared the video with her own scathing words. Friends and colleagues reached out, expressing horror and support. My parents and Ashley tried to defend themselves, leaving comments calling me an attention seeker, claiming it was all a misunderstanding. But the video didn't lie. The truth was there for everyone to see. The next morning, I walked into the police station and filed a formal report. Later that day, my parents' lawyer delivered a letter to me. It was official. I had been disowned and removed from their will. That evening, Ashley posted a tearful video online, playing the victim. She sobbed about how I was destroying the family with my lies. But I wasn't alone in this. Grandma called me later that night. "I've spoken to my lawyer," she said firmly. "I'm cutting them off completely. You're my only heir now, Emily. You've always been more my daughter than Camille's anyway." I sat on my couch that night, scrolling through the flood of messages pouring in on my phone. Support flooded in from real family members, friends, and colleagues. My phone buzzed with a text from Megan. "You're still my favorite cousin. Mom says you can come over for dinner anytime." 8 years ago, I had walked away from a toxic family. This time, I was running toward a real one. Sometimes the family you're born into isn't the family you're meant to have. Sometimes you have to build your own. What do you do when your own family tries to destroy you literally? When the people who are supposed to love you the most treat you like a pawn, a joke, and even a target? Emily worked so hard for everything she achieved: her promotion, her independence, her life. She built it all on her own, even when her family ignored her, belittled her, and favored her sister. And when she finally reached a milestone, when the world saw her for who she was, her parents tried to sweep everything under the rug, using her success as a stepping stone for their own selfish needs. But when Ashley's cruelty went too far, Emily had enough. She didn't back down when her sister tried to poison her. She didn't stay silent when her parents defended it as a prank. Instead, Emily stood tall, exposed the truth, and took the steps that would finally set her free. She didn't need to beg for their love. She didn't need to seek their approval. She had herself, and that was more than enough. So, what would you do? Would you have taken the high road, or would you have exposed the truth just like Emily did? Let's talk about it in the comments. If you found this story inspiring, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more.
The night air was thick with tension as Adrian's words sliced through the silence of our living room. "I regret marrying an older woman," he spat out, his eyes devoid of the warmth I once knew. His words stung, a stark reminder of how far we drifted apart. "My name is Alara, a 36-year-old woman working for an international corporation. Life with Adrian, my husband, 3 years my junior, started as a harmonious melody. He was a charismatic leader, the kind who naturally commanded attention. I never minded his dominance. In fact, it brought a sense of balance to our relationship. Our routine was simple. I managed the household chores while Adrian took charge of our outdoor activities. It was a dynamic that worked, until the day my father fell seriously ill. I still remember the frantic call from my mother, her voice trembling, telling me about my father's worsening condition. I rushed to the hospital, only to find that I was too late. The grief was overwhelming, a void that seemed to consume everything, including my marriage. Adrian's lack of empathy during that time was the first crack in our once solid foundation. He didn't come to the hospital, citing urgent work commitments. I tried to understand, to justify his absence, but deep down, I knew something was amiss. As I navigated through the pain of losing my father, Adrian's support was conspicuously absent. His true colors began to show, his once endearing confidence turning into unbearable arrogance. Our conversations, once filled with laughter and dreams, now echoed with arguments and bitter words. "Alara, can't you see I'm under a lot of pressure at work?" Adrian would often say, dismissing my attempts to discuss our strained relationship. I tried to hold on, believing that this was just a phase, a hurdle we could overcome. But the man I married, the man who promised to stand by me through thick and thin, was slowly fading away, replaced by a stranger who wore his face. Tonight was different, though. Tonight his words were like a cold, sharp blade, cutting through any pretense of affection or respect. His disdain was clear, his regret for our marriage palpable. "You're older, Alara. You should be grateful that someone like me chose to marry you," Adrian sneered, his voice laced with contempt. The words hit me like a physical blow, leaving me breathless. The realization dawned on me, harsh and unyielding. The man I loved, the man I had built my life with, saw me as nothing more than a convenience, a mistake he regretted. I stood there silent, the weight of his words crushing me. But amidst the pain, a spark of something else flickered, anger, defiance, perhaps even a hint of liberation. I was more than the sum of my years, more than Adrian's condescending view of me. The night ended with Adrian storming off to our bedroom, leaving me alone with my thoughts. The silence of the house was a stark contrast to the turmoil within me. But as I sat there, a plan began to form, a path to reclaiming my life from the shadows of a love that had turned into something unrecognizable. The next morning dawned with a sense of purpose. As I prepared for the day, the resolve in my heart grew stronger. It was time to take a stand, to show Adrian that I was not the weak, older woman he thought he could belittle and discard. The stage was set, and I was ready to turn the tables. It was time for Adrian to see the true strength of the woman he had underestimated. The days following our heated argument felt like walking through a dense fog. Adrian's presence in our home turned into a constant reminder of the deepening chasm between us. His dismissive attitude, once an occasional irritation, had now become a daily occurrence. It was a Thursday evening when things escalated. I had just returned from a grueling day at work, hoping for a quiet night, but the moment I stepped in, I knew peace was a luxury I wouldn't have. "Alara, you're late again." Adrian's voice was cold, devoid of concern. "I had to attend a dinner alone because you couldn't make time." "I had an important meeting, Adrian. I told you this morning," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "That's your excuse for everything, isn't it?" "Your work, always your work," he retorted, his tone dripping with sarcasm. I felt a familiar surge of frustration. "What do you want me to do, Adrian? Quit my job to cater to your every whim?" His laugh was bitter. "Oh, please, you and your high-flying job. You think you're so important, don't you?" The conversation spiraled from there, each word a sharpened barb aimed to wound. Adrian's ability to twist my words left me reeling. His accusations were baseless, yet delivered with a conviction that made me question my own sanity. "Maybe I was wrong about you, Alara. Maybe you're not the woman I thought I married," he sneered. I couldn't help but laugh, a hollow sound that echoed off the walls. "And who did you think you married, Adrian? A submissive wife who would bow to your every demand?" He stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. Maybe I should have. At least she would have appreciated what I do for her. The audacity of his words left me speechless. The man I once saw as my partner, my equal, now stood before me as someone unrecognizable, someone who viewed our marriage as a transaction. As the night wore on, the realization sank in. This wasn't just a rough patch. This was a fundamental mismatch of values and respect. The man I married, who once looked at me with love, now gazed at me with disdain and entitlement. I lay awake that night, the echoes of our argument replaying in my mind. The more I thought, the clearer it became. I couldn't continue living this way. I needed to break free from the oppressive atmosphere that our home had become. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of clarity. It was time to start planning my escape from this toxic marriage. I needed to gather my strength, my resources, and most importantly, my dignity. As I left for work, I glanced back at the house, a place that once symbolized love and companionship. Now it stood as a monument to my misplaced trust and a relationship that had soured beyond repair. The battle lines were drawn, and I was ready to fight for my freedom. Adrian's reign of emotional tyranny was about to come to an end, and I was determined to emerge victorious. The tension in our house was like a thick fog, suffocating and relentless. Adrian's disdain had become more overt, his words more cutting. But it was on the eve of my father's first death anniversary that everything reached a boiling point. "I can't believe you expect me to attend this morbid gathering," Adrian said disdainfully as I prepared for the next day. "It's important to me, Adrian. It's about honoring my father's memory," I replied, my voice laced with a plea for understanding. "Your father, not mine. Why should I have to waste my time?" He scoffed, rolling his eyes. I felt a wave of anger surge through me. "It's not a waste of time to support your wife during a time of grief," Adrian snorted. "Oh, please. It's been a year, Alara. You need to move on. Besides, I have more important things to do." His words stung like a slap. "More important than your wife's feelings?" I shot back, my voice rising. He smirked. "Exactly. I'm glad you're finally understanding where your little family drama stands in the grand scheme of things." That was it, the final straw. My patience, worn thin by months of neglect and disrespect, finally shattered. "You're unbelievable, Adrian. You're selfish, heartless." He leaned in, his eyes cold. "That's rich coming from you, Alara. Always so wrapped up in your work, in your own world." I couldn't contain my fury. "At least I care about others, unlike you." Adrian laughed, a cruel, mocking sound. "Care? Is that what you call it? It's no wonder your father was always so disappointed in you." That lie, that unfounded accusation about my beloved father, was more than I could bear. "Get out," I hissed, my voice trembling with rage. "What?" Adrian's smirk faded, replaced by a look of surprise. "Get out of this house! I can't stand to look at you anymore!" I shouted, the words erupting from deep within me. For a moment, Adrian looked taken aback, but then his expression hardened. "Fine, if that's what you want. But remember, Alara, you're the one who's going to end up alone." With those parting words, he stormed out, slamming the door behind him. I stood there, shaking, a mix of anger, relief, and profound sadness washing over me. The house was eerily silent, the void left by Adrian's absence, both a balm and a reminder of what our marriage had become. I sank onto the couch, my thoughts a whirlwind of emotions. One thing was clear: I couldn't let Adrian get away with his behavior. It was time for him to learn that his actions had consequences. As I sat there, a plan began to form in my mind. I would not only leave Adrian, but I would also make sure he regretted the way he treated me. He thought he could demean me, abandon me in my time of need, and face no repercussions? He was sorely mistaken. I would start by securing my finances, ensuring I was in a strong position to leave. Then I would gather evidence of Adrian's emotional abuse, his neglect, and his infidelity, if my suspicions were correct. He wouldn't see it coming. He was too arrogant to ever imagine I could be a threat. But I was more than he bargained for. I was Alara, and I was done being the victim. It was time for Adrian to pay for his cruelty, and I was just the person to ensure he did. The morning of my father's death anniversary dawned, a somber reminder of the loss that still echoed in my heart. Adrian had not returned since our explosive argument, and his absence on this significant day only deepened the wound. As I dressed in black, preparing to honor my father's memory, my phone buzzed. It was Adrian, his name on the screen reigniting a flicker of anger. I answered, bracing myself. "Alara, I've decided I won't be attending the memorial today." Adrian's voice was casual, almost indifferent. "You decided? It's my father's anniversary, Adrian. I couldn't keep the hurt out of my voice. Yeah, well, I have a golf game with some clients. It's important for my career, he replied nonchalantly. I felt a bitter laugh escape my lips. Your career? Is that all you ever think about? What's that supposed to mean? You're one to talk about obsession with work, he retorted. This isn't about work, Adrian. This is about being there for your wife when she needs you, I shot back, my voice trembling with emotion. Adrian sighed audibly. Look, Alara, we both know you're capable of handling this on your own. You always do. That's not the point, I exclaimed, feeling a surge of frustration. Whatever, Alara, I don't have time for this. I need to get ready, he said, dismissive as ever. The call ended abruptly, leaving me standing in silence, the weight of his absence heavier than ever. It was in that moment, surrounded by the cold walls of our home, that I realized Adrian would never change. He was a man consumed by his own needs, incapable of empathy or support. As I made my way to the memorial service, memories of my father flooded my mind. He had always been my pillar of strength, a guiding light through my darkest days. Now, in his absence, I found myself facing one of my greatest challenges alone. Throughout the service, I put on a brave face, but inside I was seething with a mix of grief and anger. Adrian's blatant disregard for my feelings was a betrayal I couldn't forgive. He had promised to be my partner, to stand by me in good times and bad. Yet here I was, mourning alone, while he played golf. The ride home was a blur, my mind racing with thoughts of revenge. Adrian had pushed me too far, and it was time he faced the consequences of his selfishness. I began to lay the groundwork for my plan. First, I would secure my financial independence, ensuring I had the resources to leave Adrian for good. Then, I would gather evidence of his neglect and emotional abuse, building a case that would leave him with nothing. As I walked through the door of our now loveless home, I felt a newfound sense of determination. Adrian had underestimated me, mistaking my patience for weakness, but he was about to learn just how strong Alara could be. The game had changed, and I was no longer playing by his rules. It was time for Adrian to face the music, and I would be the one conducting the orchestra. The days following the memorial were a blur of silent preparation and cold determination. I was like a chess player, meticulously planning each move. My first step was to secure my financial independence, a task I approached with a newfound sense of urgency. It was during this time that I made a discovery that would escalate my plans. I found divorce papers on Adrian's desk, already signed. His boldness in preparing for a divorce without even a discussion was a clear message of his disregard for our marriage. Staring at the papers, a mixture of shock and relief washed over me. This was the point of no return. I called Adrian, needing to confront him about this final betrayal. Adrian, I found the divorce papers. Is this how you tell me it's over? My voice was steady, masking the turmoil inside. His laughter chilled me. Oh, you found them? Saves me the trouble of bringing it up. I thought it's what you wanted, given how things have been. His casual dismissal of our marriage ignited a fire within me. You think you can just discard me like this after everything? It's not about discarding, Alara. It's about moving on. I need someone who supports my career, not someone who's always competing with me, he replied, his tone laced with arrogance. The irony of his words was almost laughable. Support your career? What about my career, Adrian? What about supporting me? Adrian scoffed. Your career. Please, Alara, it's always been about you and your achievements. I'm tired of being in your shadow. His words stung, but I refused to let him see my pain. You're delusional, Adrian. You've always been the one in the spotlight. I was just the one behind you, cleaning up your messes. There was a pause, and then Adrian's voice turned cold. Well, Alara, if you're not happy with the divorce, feel free to contest it. But I'm done here. I need a fresh start, with someone who appreciates me. The call ended, leaving me standing in a room filled with memories of a love that had turned sour. But amidst the heartache, there was a sense of liberation. Adrian had shown his true colors, and now it was time for me to paint a new picture of my life, one where he had no place. I would take the divorce papers to the family court, but not before ensuring I had everything in place to leave Adrian with nothing but his arrogance. He thought he could control me, break me down, but he was about to learn that Alara was not a woman to be underestimated. The revenge I planned was not just for me, but for every moment of neglect, every insult, every time he made me feel unworthy. Adrian would regret the day he underestimated the strength of the woman he married. As I set my plan into motion, a sense of empowerment enveloped me. I was no longer the passive wife, bending to Adrian's will. I was a force to be reckoned with, and my storm was just beginning. The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity. I meticulously gathered evidence of Adrian's neglect and emotional abuse, documenting each instance with precision. It was a grim task, but necessary for the battle ahead. As I prepared for my next move, fate intervened in an unexpected way. I learned through mutual acquaintances that Adrian's career was faltering. His overconfidence had led to several critical mistakes at work, and his reputation was suffering. This news, though not surprising, gave me an added edge. Adrian's world was starting to crumble, and I was ready to give it the final push. Then came the day of reckoning. I confronted Adrian one last time, armed with the evidence I had gathered and a steely resolve. "Adrian, we need to talk," I said, my voice calm but firm as he walked through the door. He glanced at me, annoyance flickering in his eyes. "What now, Alara? I'm tired and not in the mood for another one of your lectures." "It's not a lecture. It's about the divorce," I replied, holding up the papers. He smirked. "Finally ready to sign them? Decided to give up?" I met his gaze, unwavering. "No, Adrian, I'm not giving up. I'm fighting back." Confusion replaced his smug expression. "What are you talking about?" "I've gathered evidence, Adrian, evidence of all the times you neglected me, emotionally abused me. I've documented everything, and I know about your failing career." Adrian's face turned pale, his facade cracking. "You wouldn't dare. You think anyone will believe you?" "They will when they see the evidence. And let's not forget your tarnished reputation at work. How do you think that will play out in court?" I countered. For the first time I saw fear in Adrian's eyes. He had underestimated me, thinking I would quietly retreat. But I was no longer the woman he thought he could control. "Alara, you can't do this to me. I'll lose everything," he stammered, the arrogance gone from his voice. "That's the point, Adrian. You took me for granted, treated me like I was nothing. Now, you'll see what it's like to have nothing," I said, the words tasting of sweet revenge. Adrian's defeat was evident in his slumped shoulders and defeated gaze. He had lost not just the battle, but the war. As I watched him leave, a sense of triumph mixed with sadness washed over me. This was not the life I had envisioned, but it was the one I was left with. Adrian had forced my hand, and I had played it to the best of my ability. The days that followed were filled with legal proceedings and negotiations. But with my evidence and Adrian's crumbling professional life, the advantage was mine. The divorce was finalized in my favor, leaving me with a sense of closure and a fresh start. Adrian, on the other hand, was left to face the consequences of his actions. His career continued its downward spiral, and he was left with little to his name. It was a harsh outcome, but one he had brought upon himself. As I closed this painful chapter of my life, I looked forward to the future with a sense of hope. I had emerged from the ashes of a broken marriage stronger and more determined. Adrian's betrayal had been painful, but it had also been the catalyst for my transformation. I was no longer the woman he had tried to break. I was Alara, reborn and ready to take on the world. In the aftermath of the divorce, my life took on a new rhythm, one that was entirely my own. The shadow of Adrian's presence had dissipated, leaving me with a newfound sense of freedom. I embraced this change, allowing it to reshape my world. It was during this period of transformation that an opportunity arose, an offer to work at our company's overseas headquarters. It was the kind of opportunity I had dreamed of, but had previously set aside for the sake of my marriage. Now nothing held me back. As I prepared for this new chapter, Adrian reached out, his voice a mixture of desperation and false contrition. "Alara, can we talk? I've been thinking maybe we rushed into this divorce." I couldn't help but feel a bitter satisfaction at his words. "Rushed, Adrian? After everything you've done? After everything you said?" He hesitated, then continued. "I know I made mistakes, but we can start over. I've changed." The claim was laughable. "Changed? Adrian, you only reach out now because you've seen the consequences of your actions. You haven't changed. You're just scared of being alone." His voice cracked, a sign of his crumbling facade. "Alara, please?" I need you. I've lost my job, my reputation. I have nothing. The irony of his plea was not lost on me. You need me, or do you need someone to fall back on? I'm not your safety net, Adrian. I'm moving on to a better life, a life I put on hold for you. There was silence on the other end, and then a defeated sigh. So this is really it, then? Yes, Adrian. This is it. Goodbye. I ended the call, a final full stop to our conversation and to our relationship. As I boarded the plane to my new destination, I couldn't help but reflect on the journey I had undertaken. From a woman who had loved and trusted to one betrayed and belittled, and now to a woman reborn with strength and independence. The flight was long, but it gave me time to contemplate. I thought about my father, how he had always encouraged me to pursue my dreams. In a way, this move was a tribute to him, a realization of the aspirations he had always supported. Upon arrival, the new environment was a breath of fresh air. The culture, the people, the work, it was all invigorating. I threw myself into my new role with a passion I hadn't felt in years. My colleagues were welcoming, and I quickly established myself as a valuable member of the team. News from back home trickled in. Adrian's life continued its downward spiral, a path he had chosen through his actions. There was no joy in his misfortune, only a stark reminder of the consequences of selfishness and arrogance. As I settled into my new life, I found a sense of peace that had been missing for years. The scars of the past remained, but they were no longer painful. They were reminders of what I had overcome, symbols of my resilience. I occasionally thought of Adrian, wondering if he ever realized the full extent of his mistakes. But those thoughts were fleeting, mere echoes of a past life. My days were filled with new challenges and adventures. I explored my new city, made new friends, and even began to dabble in hobbies I had long neglected. Life was vibrant, full of possibilities. As I looked out at the city skyline one evening, a sense of contentment washed over me. I had faced adversity, fought for my dignity, and emerged victorious. I was Ilara, no longer defined by the shadows of a failed marriage, but by the bright promise of a future I had reclaimed. This was not just a new chapter, it was a whole new book. And I was the author, ready to write a story of success, happiness, and true fulfillment. My name is Adeline, and at 42, I find myself living a life far removed from the carefree dreams of my youth. My days are a relentless cycle, split between my clerical job and the dwindling family liquor store, a once thriving establishment now teetering on the edge of ruin. The store, nestled in a cozy corner of our neighborhood, had been the pride of our family for decades. It was a time when our name was synonymous with quality spirits, and our monopoly in the area was unchallenged. But as years passed, strict regulations strangled the nightlife, and our primary clientele, hotel banquet halls, pubs, and restaurants, dwindled to a mere trickle. In the midst of this decline stood my father, Harold, a man stubbornly clinging to the past. His management style, if one could call it that, was a recipe for disaster. Debts mounted, yet he persisted with his outdated methods, blind to the changing world around him. 2 years ago, in a desperate bid to salvage what was left of our legacy, I moved back into my childhood home. The liquor store, struggling to stay afloat, became my evening haunt after office hours. Each day as I stepped through its doors, the familiar jingle of the bell was a stark reminder of the burden I shouldered. "Dad, are you drinking again?" I'd often find him behind the counter, a bottle in hand, his laughter a stark contrast to the store's empty aisles. "Ha-ha, these bottles aren't selling anyway." "Might as well enjoy them," he'd slur, the smell of alcohol heavy in the air. I'd sigh, a mix of frustration and resignation, as I set about cleaning the cluttered store and delving into the books. Our finances were a labyrinth of debts and overdue bills, a testament to years of neglect. Dinner was always a solitary affair, long past 9 p.m., after the day's tasks were done. My parents, lost in their own world, would be asleep, leaving the kitchen and the responsibility of meals to me. Every night, I'd prepare a simple meal, usually instant ramen, and then start prepping for the next morning's breakfast. My mom preferred bread, while Dad was a rice person. It was a small detail, but in our household, even the smallest preferences were my responsibility. Weekends, which should have been my respite, began at the crack of dawn, thanks to my mother, Irene. "Adeline, make your father's miso soup quickly." she'd demand, her voice cutting through any hopes of rest. "Why can't you do that, Mom?" I'd protest, only to be met with her sharp retort. "Why should I have to do the housework when you're here? Now get up." I had always been the meticulous one, the daughter who naturally took on chores and responsibilities. It started in high school, and by the time I graduated, I was the family's backbone. Tired of this endless cycle, I had taken up the office job right after school, hoping to escape. But escape, it seemed, was a luxury I couldn't afford. The liquor store's debts, a staggering $3 million, loomed over us like a dark cloud. Living frugally became second nature to me. $1 cosmetics, homemade lunches, enduring the cold to save on heating, all in a desperate bid to keep us afloat. One day, as I suggested leveraging the internet to boost sales, my father's response was as predictable as it was infuriating. "Our old way is the best way. I'm not the problem, the world is." His words echoed in my head as I juggled household chores with my attempts to rejuvenate the business. There was never enough time, always a step behind, always just out of reach of a solution. But I was determined. Against my father's resistance, I started online classes, selling rare alcohol from our store. This innovative approach was a hit, especially with restrictions limiting people's movements. Slowly, the business picked up. It was a glimmer of hope in an otherwise dark tunnel. But as our store's name gained online visibility, so too did my workload increase. Free time became a distant memory, yet I pushed on, believing it was all for the greater good. That belief, however, was about to be shattered. The rhythm of my life was an unending dance of duty and disappointment. Each day, I awoke to a world where my efforts seemed invisible to those who mattered most. My family's store, once a symbol of pride, had become a chain around my neck, dragging me down into an abyss of resentment and exhaustion. One particularly grueling evening, I found myself sifting through piles of overdue invoices, the numbers blurring before my eyes. The store was silent, save for the occasional clink of a bottle as my father, Harold, indulged in his habitual drinking. "Dad, we can't keep going like this. We're sinking," I said, my voice a mix of despair and frustration. He simply chuckled, his words slurred. "Ah, Adeline, always so serious. Relax, have a drink. It'll all work out." His nonchalance was like a slap in the face. How could he be so blind? The weight of our debts was crushing, and yet there he sat, drowning his sorrows in the very product that was supposed to be our salvation. The following morning, as I prepared breakfast, my mother, Irene, sauntered into the kitchen. "Make sure you clean the house today. Clara and her husband might visit," she ordered, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Clara, my younger sister, was the polar opposite of me. Free-spirited, carefree, she had floated through life on a cloud of whims and desires, always landing softly on the cushion of our parents' support. Even after marrying a man as aimless as herself, she continued to lean on our parents financially. As I scrubbed and cleaned, the bitter thoughts churned in my mind. Why was I the one to bear all this? Why did Clara get to live a life of leisure while I toiled away? Later that day, as Clara breezed into the store, her laughter echoed mockingly off the walls. "Oh, Adeline, still stuck in this old place? You really should get out more," she chided, her words tinged with a carelessness that stung. I bit back a sharp retort, focusing instead on the task at hand. The store, now a little busier thanks to my online efforts, demanded my full attention. But Clara's words lingered, a painful reminder of the life I could have had. That night, as I lay in bed, the exhaustion of my double life weighed heavily on me. My parents' indifference, Clara's thoughtlessness, the endless cycle of work, it was all becoming too much. A voice inside me whispered of change, of breaking free, but fear and duty held me back. The next day brought no respite. As I balanced the accounts, my mother's voice cut through the quiet. "Adeline, when are you going to settle down? You're not getting any younger, you know." I looked up, stunned. Was this really what she worried about? Not our failing business, not the crushing debt, but my marital status? "Maybe when our store isn't on the brink of collapse," I replied curtly, turning back to my work. Her scoff was the only response I received. As days turned into weeks, the strain began to take its toll. Sleepless nights, skipped meals, and constant stress left me worn and weary. But there was no time to rest, no time to breathe. The store, the house, my job, they all demanded more of me than I had to give. It was during one of these endless days that I received the news. Clara was pregnant. The family buzzed with excitement, a stark contrast to the chaos that was our reality. "That's great, the first grandchild," I managed to say, a forced smile on my lips, but my mother's next words were like a cold splash of water. "That's why you need to leave the house." I stared at her, disbelief and anger warring within me. "What? Why?" "You need to make room for Clara and her family," my father added, his tone dismissive. I was speechless. After everything I had done, sacrificed, endured, this was how they repaid me? A cold, unceremonious dismissal? The injustice of it burned my chest, a fire that threatened to consume me. But in that moment, something shifted within me. A resolve, steel and unwavering, took root. I would leave, but on my terms, and they would soon realize the true cost of their ingratitude. The decision to leave my childhood home, the epicenter of my lifelong sacrifices, didn't come easy. Yet, as I packed my belongings, each item I tucked away felt like a shard of the heavy chain I was shedding. The house, once a sanctuary of family memories, had morphed into a prison of ungrateful demands and unreciprocated toil. In the midst of my packing, my father Harold stumbled in, reeking of liquor. "What's this? Planning a little trip?" he sneered, his voice dripping with derision. I straightened up, meeting his bleary eyes with a calm I didn't feel. "I'm moving out," I stated, the words tasting like freedom. His reaction was a bitter laugh. "Moving out? And who's going to run the store? Cook and clean? You think you're irreplaceable?" His words, meant to wound, only strengthened my resolve. "You'll have to figure that out, won't you?" I replied, turning back to my packing. The following days were a whirlwind of activity. Amidst the chaos of moving and handling my office work, I still found myself drawn back to the liquor store, the pull of responsibility too ingrained to ignore. One evening, as I was tidying up the store for what felt like the last time, Clara breezed in, her carefree demeanor unchanged. "So you're really leaving us, huh?" she asked, her voice light, almost mocking. I paused, a myriad of emotions swirling within me. "Yes, Clara, I am. Someone else can shoulder the burdens now." Her laughter was a cold echo in the empty store. "Oh, Adeline, always the martyr. Don't worry, I'm sure we'll manage without you." Her words, meant to belittle, only fueled the fire in my heart. My family's true colors were glaringly evident now, selfish, uncaring, and utterly blind to the sacrifices made in their name. The night before my departure, as I sat amidst boxes of my life, a sense of surreal calm enveloped me. The years of being the dependable daughter, the responsible sister, were coming to an end. But as I looked around the room, a wave of sadness hit me. This was the home where I grew up, where I laughed and cried, where I dreamed of a future that was never mine. My mother, Irene, appeared at my door, her expression unreadable. "You don't have to do this, Adeline. We need you here." Her words, so devoid of understanding, stung. "No, Mom, you needed me. You just never realized it." The day I left, the house was silent, an eerie testament to the void I was leaving behind. My parents stood by, their expressions a mix of confusion and resentment, as I loaded the last of my things into the car. As I drove away, the familiar streets of my childhood receded in the rearview mirror. I felt a pang of loss, but more than that, a burgeoning sense of relief. I was leaving behind a life of thankless servitude, stepping into a future where my worth wasn't measured by the sacrifices I made for others. But as the distance between me and my former life grew, so did my resolve. My family, so accustomed to my constant support, would soon face the harsh reality of their own making, and I, freed from their unappreciative grasp, would finally start living for myself. Settling into my new apartment, a modest but cozy space, I felt the first true breath of freedom I had experienced in years. It was a stark contrast to the burdensome atmosphere of my parents' house. Yet, even in this newfound tranquility, the echoes of my past life haunted me. It wasn't long before the reality of my family's dependence on me became painfully apparent. My phone buzzed incessantly with calls and messages from home. Each plea for help, each demand for my return, was a reminder of the suffocating expectations I had escaped. One evening, as I was preparing a simple dinner for myself, my phone lit up with a familiar number. Bracing myself, I answered. It was my father, Harold, his voice slurred and angry. "Adeline, where are you? The store is a mess. We need you here," he barked into the phone. I clenched my jaw, the old feelings of obligation tugging at me. "Dad, I've moved out. You and Clara will have to manage on your own." His response was a string of insults and accusations, blaming me for abandoning the family in their time of need. His words were like daggers, aimed to wound, but I had grown a shield of resolve. "I'm not your crutch anymore, Dad. You'll have to stand on your own," I replied, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. The days that followed were a relentless barrage of guilt trips and emotional blackmail. My mother, Irene, played her part well, lamenting how I could leave my family in such dire straits. "You're being selfish, Adeline. Think about what you're doing to us," she implored during one of her many calls. But the years of neglect and underappreciation had hardened my heart. "I've thought about it for far too long, Mom. Now, it's time for me to think about myself." Amidst this tumult, I found solace in my work and the few friends I had kept at a distance over the years. Among them was Marcus, a colleague from the office who had always been kind, but whom I had never allowed myself to get close to. One day, after a particularly grueling call with my mother, Marcus noticed my distress. "Adeline, you okay? You've been looking really stressed lately," he said, his concern genuine. I hesitated, then decided to open up. "It's just family stuff. I recently moved out, and they're not taking it well." Marcus listened intently, offering a sympathetic ear and words of encouragement. His kindness was a balm to my weary soul. For the first time in a long while, I felt seen and understood. But the reprieve was short-lived. The stress of juggling my new life, the constant barrage from my family, and the lingering guilt took its toll. One day at work, as I sat at my desk, the room began to spin. The last thing I remember was Marcus's voice calling my name before everything went black. I awoke in a hospital bed, my head throbbing with pain. Marcus was there, his face etched with worry. "You gave us quite a scare, Adeline. You collapsed and hit your head. How are you feeling?" Tears welled up in my eyes, not from the pain, but from the overwhelming sense of care and concern I had been denied for so long. "Thank you, Marcus. I don't know what to say." Marcus squeezed my hand gently. "Don't say anything. Just focus on getting better. And maybe, when you're ready, think about making some changes. You can't keep going like this." His words resonated deep within me. For so long I had lived for others, neglecting my own well-being. It was time to make a change, to live for myself. As I lay in that hospital bed, the realization hit me hard. My family's selfishness and dependence had nearly broken me. But now, I was on the path to healing and self-discovery. And I was determined to not let anyone pull me back into the abyss from which I had just crawled out. Recovering from the incident at work, I found myself at a crossroads. Marcus's words echoed in my mind, urging me to change the trajectory of my life. It was time to prioritize my health and happiness over the never-ending demands of my family. The decision was made. I would no longer be at the beck and call of my parents and Clara. This newfound resolve, however, did not stop the onslaught of calls and messages, each more desperate and manipulative than the last. One evening, as I sifted through my mail, a call from my mother, Irene, came through. Her voice was shrill, laced with panic and anger. "Adeline, you need to come back. The store is failing without you. We're struggling to keep up." Her plea was a twisted symphony of guilt and blame. "You're responsible for this mess. You can't just abandon your family." I felt a surge of anger, but it was quickly replaced by a steely calm. "No, Mom, I'm not responsible for the years of mismanagement and neglect. You and Dad made your bed. Now you have to lie in it." Her response was a mix of incredulous outrage and desperate bargaining, but I stood firm. The chains of guilt and obligation had been broken. As days turned into weeks, the frequency of their calls diminished, replaced by a foreboding silence. I immersed myself in my work and started exploring hobbies I had long neglected. Life was beginning to have a semblance of normalcy and peace. Then, one day, a call from Clara jolted me back to reality. Her voice was hysterical, a stark contrast to her usual carefree tone. "Adeline, you have to help us. The store is on the brink of closure. We're drowning in debt." Her words were laced with panic and a hint of realization of the gravity of their situation. But it was too late. "Clara, I warned you all. I can't fix years of mistakes and neglect. You need to figure it out," I replied, my voice void of the sympathy she sought. The call ended with Clara's sobs and pleas echoing in my ears, but they no longer had the power to sway me. My family had to face the consequences of their actions, the result of years of taking my efforts for granted. Weeks passed, and the inevitable news arrived. The family liquor store, once a cornerstone of our neighborhood, had closed its doors for good. The failure of the business was a harsh blow to my parents and Clara, a bitter taste of reality they had long avoided. I heard through mutual acquaintances about the chaos that ensued. My parents, unable to cope with their new reality, were consumed by blame and regret. Clara and her husband, faced with the harshness of responsibility, were at a loss, their illusory world shattered. There was a part of me that felt vindicated, seeing them finally reap what they had sown. But there was also a pang of sadness for what could have been if only they had appreciated and reciprocated my efforts. As I reflected on these events, I realized this was not just the end of the family business, but the end of a chapter in my life, a chapter filled with sacrifice and unacknowledged labor. Now it was time to write a new story, one where I was the protagonist of my own life. Life in my new world, unshackled from the chains of familial obligation, was a revelation. My days, once dictated by the whims and needs of my parents and Clara, were now my own. I relished the freedom, the ability to make decisions for myself without the cloud of guilt and manipulation that had hovered over me for so long. But even in this newfound paradise, the specter of my old life occasionally intruded. One day, as I was enjoying a quiet evening at home, my phone rang with an all-too-familiar number. The sight of it stirred a mix of irritation and curiosity. Bracing myself, I answered. It was my mother, Irene, her voice tinged with desperation. "Adeline, you have to come back. We're in trouble. The debt collectors are after us." Her plea, once capable of dragging me back into the mire, now fell on deaf ears. "Mom, I've told you before. I can't help you. You need to sort this out yourselves." "But we're your family. How can you abandon us like this?" she cried, the audacity of her words almost laughable. "Family?" I retorted, my voice cold. "The same family that took my efforts for granted, that kicked me out when I was no longer convenient? I think you've mistaken me for someone else." The line went dead, her silence more telling than any words could be. They were finally starting to understand the gravity of their situation, the consequences of their actions. Over the next few weeks, news of my family's plight trickled in through various channels. The once proud owners of the neighborhood liquor store were now pariahs, weighed down by debt and shunned by those they had once considered friends. My sister Clara, who had never known a day of hard work, was now facing the harsh realities of life. Her husband, equally inept at dealing with adversity, was no support. Their marriage, built on convenience and financial dependence, was crumbling under the strain. I heard about their heated arguments, their desperate attempts to find easy ways out, and their incessant blaming of each other for their downfall. It was a pitiful sight. Yet a part of me felt a sense of poetic justice. They were finally experiencing a fraction of the hardships I had endured for their sake. But it was during a chance encounter at a local cafe that the full extent of their decline became apparent. Seated at a corner table, I saw my parents, haggard and worn. They were arguing, their voices a mix of anger and despair. I watched unseen as they laid bare the years of mismanagement and selfish decisions that had led to their undoing. The sight was sobering. This was the family I had left behind, a family that had never valued me until I was gone. Their downfall was of their own making, a direct result of their actions and choices. As I left the cafe, a sense of closure washed over me. I had moved on, built a life where I was valued and appreciated. The echoes of my past, though still lingering, were just that, echoes. They no longer had the power to dictate my life or my happiness. The chapter of my life, defined by thankless sacrifice and unreciprocated loyalty, was closed. Ahead lay a path of self-discovery and fulfillment, a journey I was eager to embark on. The days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, each passing moment affirming my decision to step away from the life that had once threatened to suffocate me. I had created a world for myself, a sanctuary where respect and self-care were not just ideals, but realities. In this new life, I found joy in the small things. The quiet mornings, the leisurely walks, the books I had always wanted to read but never had the time for. My job, once a mere escape from the chaos at home, now became a source of fulfillment and growth. It was during this period of tranquility that Marcus, my colleague who'd been a pillar of support, became more than just a friend. Our shared experiences at work and his unwavering kindness during my tumultuous times blossomed into a deep, meaningful relationship. One crisp autumn evening, as we walked through the park, Marcus stopped, his eyes locking with mine. "Adeline, you've changed so much since we first met. You're stronger, happier. I'm glad I've been a part of this journey with you." His words, simple yet profound, filled my heart. "Marcus, you've been my rock. I don't think I could have made it through without you." As we stood there, amidst the falling leaves, a profound sense of contentment enveloped me. I had come so far from the woman who lived only to serve the whims of her ungrateful family. However, the echoes of my past were not completely silenced. News about my family still reached me, each update a grim reminder of their continuous downward spiral. The once thriving liquor store was now a forgotten relic, its doors permanently shut. My parents, stripped of their pride and business, were a shadow of their former selves, embroiled in a never-ending cycle of blame and regret. Clara and her husband, having lost their financial safety net, were adrift in a sea of their own making. Their frivolous lifestyle, once sustained by my efforts, was now a distant memory. It was during one of my visits to the local market that I overheard a conversation about them. "Have you heard about the family that used to run the liquor store? It's a sad story. They lost everything, even their home," a woman said to her companion, shaking her head. "Yes, I heard. They say the daughter who used to do everything for them left and everything fell apart," the other replied, a tone of sympathy in her voice. I walked past them, a sense of vindication mixed with a tinge of sadness. My family had reaped what they sowed, a harsh lesson in the value of gratitude and hard work. But their fate was no longer my burden. I had released myself from the chains of their expectations and neglect. My life was now my own, a canvas on which I was free to paint my future. As I looked forward to my life with Marcus, a sense of hope and excitement filled me. We had plans, dreams to chase, a future to build together. The scars of my past would always be a part of me, but they no longer defined me. In the end, the greatest revenge was not the downfall of those who had wronged me, but the life I had built in spite of them. A life of happiness, love, and fulfillment. A life truly worth living. "Emily, this house, it was always meant to be mine. Sign the divorce papers and leave." Nathan's voice was cold, devoid of the warmth that once drew me to him. I stood in the living room, the walls echoing his harsh words, feeling a mix of disbelief and rising anger. Our marriage, once a sanctuary, had transformed into a battlefield. "You can't be serious," I replied, struggling to keep my voice steady. "This is our home, Nathan, not just yours." He smirked, a gesture so unlike the man I had fallen in love with. "Our home? Emily, wake up. You're just a housewife. I've been the one paying for everything." I clenched my fists, feeling a storm brewing inside me. "A housewife? Is that all I am to you now?" I retorted. Nathan walked closer, his presence overbearing. "Exactly. You've done nothing but live off my hard work. It's time you realize your place." I could feel my parents' worried glances from the corner of the room. They had come over for dinner, unaware they'd be witnessing the collapse of my marriage. I didn't want them to see me like this, broken, belittled by the man I once adored. "Fine, Nathan," I said, my voice laced with a newfound resolve. "I'll sign your papers. But remember this, you will regret it." He laughed, a sound that sent shivers down my spine. "Regret? Emily, you'll be the one with regrets." I turned away, my parents following silently. As I walked out of that room, out of the life I had built with Nathan, I knew this was not the end. It was a beginning of my fight, my retribution. As I sat in my small but cozy apartment, the memories of my past flooded back, painting a stark contrast to the present. I was the cherished only child of my parents, born after years of their struggling with infertility. Their joy knew no bounds when I came into their lives, a sentiment echoed in every childhood photo, every birthday celebration. "Emily, you were always the center of our world," my mother used to say with a gentle smile. My parents, though not wealthy, spared no effort in providing for me. They encouraged my education, my love for reading, and nurtured my dreams. But with their sacrifice came an unspoken burden. the pressure to find happiness, to make their efforts worthwhile. Meeting Nathan seemed like fulfilling that unspoken promise. He was charming, attentive, and shared a similar background. An only child with aging parents. Our connection was instant, our conversations filled with laughter and shared aspirations. Our wedding was a joyous affair, celebrated with tears and blessings from both families. But the fairy tale started to crumble soon after. Nathan's true colors began to surface once the honeymoon phase faded. His sweet words turned into sharp commands, his once admiring glances now carried a hint of disdain. "You need to be more efficient around the house, Emily. Look at how my mother managed everything despite her job," Nathan would often say, comparing me unfavorably to his mother. His relentless criticism wasn't just confined to household chores. He started controlling our finances, giving me a meager allowance, scoffing whenever I suggested I could return to work. "Work? What for? You can barely manage the house," he'd sneer, his words cutting deeper each time. As I sat there, reminiscing, anger boiled within me. How had I not seen the signs? How had I allowed myself to become this person, a shadow of my former self, living in a loveless, controlling marriage? The realization was bitter, but it sparked a determination within me. "I will not let this be my story," I whispered to myself, feeling a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. It was time for Nathan to see the real Emily, the woman who wasn't just a beloved child or a submissive wife. It was time for him to face the consequences of his actions. The days turned into months, and the love that once seemed endless within the walls of our home slowly twisted into a suffocating trap. Each morning began with Nathan's cold demands echoing in the kitchen. "Remember, Emily, dinner needs to be perfect. My colleagues are coming over tonight," Nathan would command, his tone leaving no room for protest. On one such evening, as I meticulously set the table for Nathan's guests, my hands trembled with suppressed anger. The sound of laughter and casual conversation filled the living room, a stark contrast to the turmoil inside me. "Emily, this steak is slightly overcooked," Nathan commented loudly in front of his colleagues, a smirk playing on his lips. His words, seemingly trivial, were a deliberate jab at my efforts. I forced a smile, replying, "I'll make sure it's better next time." But inside, I was screaming. This wasn't the man I married. This was someone who enjoyed belittling his wife, showcasing his dominance in this skewed power play we called our marriage. The evenings when Nathan's parents visited were even more challenging. They treated our home as their own, never acknowledging my efforts to make them comfortable. Nathan, on the other hand, would spare no expense to please them, often at the cost of our own needs. "Why can't we invite my parents sometimes?" I once dared to ask. Nathan's response was swift and harsh. "Why should I spend my money on your parents? They're not my responsibility." That night, as I lay in bed, I realized the depth of Nathan's selfishness and disregard for me and my family. He had created a world where only his desires mattered, where I was nothing more than a silent participant in his scripted play of domestic bliss. But no more. The fire of rebellion was kindling within me. I was tired of being a mere puppet, tired of the disrespect and emotional torment. It was time for Nathan to see that I wasn't just his obedient wife. I was a woman with a voice, a woman who deserved respect. "I will not be broken," I whispered into the darkness, my resolve strengthening. The seeds of my plan were already taking root. Nathan had underestimated me, and that was his biggest mistake. The day my parents' house was caught in a devastating fire marked the beginning of my rebellion. The house, a symbol of my childhood memories, now stood partially destroyed. My parents, though safe, were shaken and disoriented. This was more than just a building, it was a repository of cherished memories and love. I remember standing amidst the charred remains, my mother's words echoing in my ears. "This house held so much of our life, Emily. Letting it go feels like losing a part of ourselves." That night, I lay awake, pondering over my parents' plight and my own stifled existence under Nathan's rule. A plan began to form in my mind, a plan not just to secure my parents' future, but also to free myself from Nathan's tyranny. The next day, I approached Nathan, my voice steady but laced with faux naivety. "Nathan, my parents' house? It's beyond repair. I was thinking of buying them a new one, using my savings." His reaction was predictably self-centered. "Your savings? Well, as long as it's not my money. But there was more to my plan than he knew. The house I was considering for my parents was under renovation, set to be a perfect ruse for my greater scheme. Weeks passed, and the day arrived to help my parents move. Nathan, believing the house to be a simple purchase, had no idea of the trap I was setting. His arrogance was my advantage. As I orchestrated the move, Nathan arrived unexpectedly, declaring ownership of the house and demanding a divorce. It was the moment I had been waiting for. "Fine, Nathan, you shall have your divorce," I said calmly, hiding the triumphant smile that threatened to break through. Little did he know, the house he so arrogantly claimed was not the real deal. The actual property, a modest but comfortable home, was waiting, its location a secret kept from Nathan. As I left with my parents, the look of confusion and defeat on Nathan's face was the first victory in my silent war against him. But it was just the beginning. The real retribution was yet to come. In the days following the move, I worked meticulously, my actions cloaked in secrecy. Nathan, oblivious to my intentions, basked in his perceived victory. It was time to unveil the truth and shatter his delusions. I recall the day vividly. Nathan had called, his voice dripping with condescension. "So, Emily, how does it feel to be back at your parents' old cramped house?" I smiled into the phone, a cold, calculated smile. "Actually, Nathan, we're quite comfortable. You see, the house you claimed was just a temporary arrangement. The real property is elsewhere, safe from your greed." There was a pause, a silence filled with his dawning realization. "What are you saying, Emily? That can't be." "Oh, but it is. And about the divorce papers you so kindly left for me, I've already filed them," I continued, my voice steady and strong. Nathan's reaction was a mix of confusion and anger, a stark contrast to his usual arrogant demeanor. "This isn't over, Emily. You can't just—" But I cut him off, no longer willing to endure his tirades. "It is over, Nathan, and let me remind you, I'm not just the meek housewife you thought you married. I am a lawyer, well-versed in the law. Your attempts to intimidate me are futile." His silence on the other end was the sweetest revenge, a validation of my newfound empowerment. The years of belittlement and control were coming to an end, and I was the orchestrator of his downfall. As I hung up the phone, a sense of liberation washed over me. I had turned the tables on Nathan, using his arrogance against him. It was a victory, not just for me, but for every moment I had felt insignificant in his shadow. The path ahead was clear. I would rebuild my life, free from Nathan's oppression, and stand tall, a woman reborn from the ashes of a marriage that had sought to diminish her. The day of reckoning arrived sooner than expected. My phone buzzed, and Nathan's name flashed on the screen. Bracing myself, I answered, my heart pounding with a mix of anticipation and resolve. "Emily, this is madness. You can't do this to me." Nathan's voice was frantic, a stark contrast to his usual composed and condescending tone. "Oh, but I can, and I have, Nathan," I replied, my voice calm and unwavering. "You thought you could walk over me, take what's mine, and discard me like I was nothing. You were wrong." He was silent for a moment, and I could almost hear the cogs turning in his mind as he tried to comprehend the gravity of his situation. "Emily, listen, we can work this out. Let's forget about the divorce and start over," he pleaded, his voice laced with false sweetness. The suggestion was laughable. "Start over? After everything you've done? No, Nathan, I deserve better, and so do my parents." I could feel his desperation through the phone. "But the house, my reputation, my career, you're ruining everything." "That's the consequence of your actions, Nathan. You chose this path when you underestimated me, when you treated me and my family with such disregard," I said firmly. The call ended with Nathan's pleas fading into a defeated silence. It was a victory, not just legally but morally and emotionally. I had stood up to the bully who had made my life miserable, and I had won. In the following weeks, Nathan's life unraveled. His attempts to control and manipulate had backfired, leaving him to face the harsh reality of his actions. His once flourishing career took a hit as the details of our divorce and his behavior became the talk of the town. As for me, I found solace in my parents' company, in the small yet comfortable home that was truly ours. I had reclaimed my life, emerging stronger and more determined. The road ahead was uncertain, but it was mine to travel, free from the shadows of a loveless marriage. Sitting in the sunlit living room of the modest house that was now a sanctuary for my parents and me, I reflected on the tumultuous journey I had endured. The walls, freshly painted, seemed to symbolize a new beginning, a stark contrast to the oppressive walls of the house I once shared with Nathan. It had been several weeks since the divorce was finalized, and with each passing day, the weight of my past life lifted, replaced by a sense of peace and self-assuredness. Nathan's attempts to reach out had ceased, his once looming presence now just a distant memory. My parents, who had witnessed my transformation, were my pillars of strength. "We always knew you had this strength in you, Emily," my father said one evening, his eyes brimming with pride. I had returned to work, immersing myself in the world of law, a world where I was respected and valued for my intellect and skills. The stark contrast to my life with Nathan was both liberating and empowering, but it wasn't just about reclaiming my professional identity. It was about rediscovering who I was beyond the roles of daughter, wife, or victim. I was Emily, a woman of resilience and determination. One day as I sat in a cafe, lost in thought, a familiar face approached me. It was John, an old friend and colleague. "Emily, it's been a while. You look different, happier." His words made me realize how far I had come. "I am happier, John. I've come to understand that sometimes letting go is the first step to finding yourself." Our conversation flowed effortlessly, and as he left, he said, "Let's not wait another lifetime to catch up again, Emily." As I walked back home, I felt a glimmer of something new, a possibility of a future that was mine to shape. Maybe, just maybe, there was room for new beginnings, for new love. But this time on my terms. The journey had been long and arduous, but as I stood in my parents' garden watching the sunset, I realized that every challenge had led me to this moment of tranquility and self-discovery. The shadows of my past had finally lifted, giving way to the warm, hopeful light of a new dawn. My name is Alexandra, and I'm a 32-year-old woman trapped in an electric nightmare of my own making. The trouble started, ironically, with something as innocent as childhood friendship. Bella and I grew up together, as close as sisters. Our bond formed in the sandbox and sealed over scraped knees and shared secrets. She was the calm to my storm, the poised figure amidst my chaotic energy. But as we grew, I watched Bella transform, like a butterfly, but into someone I barely recognized. I remember the day it changed. We were 12, sitting in my cluttered bedroom, surrounded by video games and comic books, my world. Bella, twirling a lock of her hair, said, "Alex, do you ever think about being popular? Like being one of those girls everyone admires?" I had laughed it off, but Bella hadn't. As the years rolled on, she morphed into the epitome of teenage allure. Her smile could stop boys mid-sentence, and her laugh became a siren song in the hallways of our high school. She was worshipped, and with that worship, she changed. The sweet girl I knew was replaced by someone who saw friendship as a ladder to climb, each rung a step further away from me. But even as we drifted apart, she never turned her venom on me. She'd saunter into my world, dropping her queenly facade, and ask for my advice on boys, as if we were still those little girls sharing secrets in a treehouse. Despite everything, I couldn't bring myself to hate her. Life took us in different directions after high school. I ventured off to New York for college, embracing the chaos of the city, while Bella stayed back, reigning over our small town like a provincial queen. It wasn't until years later, after I had returned home and started dating Mark, that Bella and I truly collided again. Mark was everything I had ever wanted in a partner, kind, attentive, and with a smile that could light up the darkest of my days. I introduced him to my family with a heart full of hope, not knowing that this would be the beginning of my undoing. It was a chance encounter. Bella, as if summoned by some wicked twist of fate, appeared at my doorstep just as Mark and I were leaving. Her eyes, sharp and calculating, swept over him. "Is this the famous Mark?" she asked, a hint of something sinister in her tone. "Yeah, this is him," I replied, a knot forming in my stomach. Bella's gaze lingered on Mark a moment too long before she flashed a predatory smile. "Well, aren't you going to introduce me properly, Alex?" The unease that had started as a mere flutter in my heart grew into a storm as I watched Bella weave her web around Mark. She was a master at this game, her words honeyed and her laughs perfectly timed. Mark, bless him, was oblivious to the danger. He was just being polite, but to Bella, politeness was an invitation. A few days later, I arranged for the three of us to meet at a cafe, thinking it would put my mind at ease. How wrong I was. As Mark excused himself to the restroom, Bella leaned in, her voice a conspiratorial whisper. "Alex, I have to tell you something. I think I'm falling for Mark." I stared at her, the words not quite making sense. "What are you talking about, Bella?" Her eyes, dark and serious, met mine. "I can't help it. He's just so perfect." It felt like a slap in the face, a betrayal wrapped in velvet. I wanted to scream, to call her out, but the fear of losing Mark silenced me. I forced a smile, a mask to hide the crumbling world inside me. "Stop joking, Bella. That's not funny." She laughed, a sound that's once comfort, now a harbinger of my impending heartache. "Relax, Alex. I'm not going to steal your boyfriend. It's just a little crush." But as I sat there, watching her watch him, I knew it was more than a crush. Bella didn't do things by halves. She was a storm, and she was about to break everything in her path. The cafe was bustling with the usual morning crowd, a cacophony of clinking cups and casual chatter. Mark, Bella, and I found a quiet corner. I could feel the weight of Bella's gaze, heavy and unsettling, as she studied Mark with an intensity that made my skin crawl. "So, Mark, Alex tells me you're a doctor." "That must be fascinating," Bella began, her voice dripping with feigned innocence. Mark, ever the humble, nodded. "It has its moments, but it's just a job at the end of the day." Bella's laugh was a melody designed to ensnare. "Just a job? Saving lives sounds more like a superhero's work to me." I watched, a silent spectator in a play I never wanted to attend. Mark was oblivious to the undercurrents, responding with polite but disinterested answers. But Bella, she was relentless. Each word, each gesture was a calculated move in her game of seduction. As the conversation drifted, I felt an increasing sense of isolation. It was as if I were a ghost at my own table, unseen and unheard. When Mark excused himself, Bella turned to me, her mask slipping slightly. "Alex, aren't you worried?" she asked, her eyes narrowing. "Worried about what?" I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. Bella leaned in, her voice a venomous whisper. "That someone might take him away from you. Someone like me." The raw honesty in her words struck me. This was no joke or playful banter. This was a declaration of war. "Bella, what has gotten into you?" "He's my boyfriend," I said, my voice tinged with disbelief and hurt. She shrugged, a predator confident in her prowess. "I can't help who I fall for, Alex. And let's be honest, you and Mark, I give it 6 months." I wanted to lash out, to scream at her for her betrayal, but the words died in my throat. Instead, I sat there paralyzed by the realization that the childhood friend I once knew was long gone. Mark returned, oblivious to the tension. As we left the cafe, Bella's parting words were a knife in my back. "Let's do this again soon. I'd love to get to know Mark better." The ride home was a silent one. Mark, unaware of the storm brewing, chatted about mundane things. But my mind was elsewhere, trapped in a whirlpool of betrayal and fear. That night, as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I made a decision. Bella had thrown down the gauntlet, and I wasn't going to let her walk away unscathed. She wanted a war, she would get one. But unlike her, I would play the long game. I would wait, watch, and when the time was right, I would strike. Bella may have been the queen of manipulation, but I had a few tricks up my sleeve too. In the quiet darkness of my room, a plan began to take shape. A plan that would bring Bella's world crashing down around her. It was a dangerous path, one that could destroy everything I held dear. But I was past the point of no return. Bella had made this personal, and I was going to make sure she regretted it. The days that followed were a blur of unease and suspicion. Mark, caught up in his work, remained blissfully unaware of the storm brewing just beneath the surface. Bella, on the other hand, seemed to be everywhere, a constant, looming presence in my life. It was a crisp autumn afternoon when my fears were confirmed. Walking down the familiar streets of our town, I saw them, Bella and Mark, strolling together, lost in conversation. They looked comfortable, too comfortable, with each other. My heart pounded against my chest as I approached them, my mind racing. "Mark, Bella," I called out, my voice shaking. They turned, surprise etched on their faces. Mark's expression changed to one of concern as he saw my distress. "Alexandra, what's wrong?" he asked, stepping towards me. "Why are you two together?" The words tumbled out, a mix of accusation and disbelief. Bella's face was a mask of feigned innocence. Oh, we just bumped into each other. Decided to catch up, you know? Her casual dismissal of the situation fueled my anger. Catch up, really, Bella? Or is this one of your little games? Mark looked between us, confusion turning to realization. Alex, is this what you think? There's nothing going on. Bella's eyes met mine, a challenge in their depths. Why, Alexandra? Do you not trust your boyfriend? Or is it me you don't trust? The confrontation was drawing an audience, curious onlookers pausing to witness the drama. Mark reached out, trying to calm the situation, but I shrugged him off. Bella, I've known you my whole life. You're like a sister to me. How could you do this? My voice broke, the weight of years of friendship crumbling under the weight of her betrayal. Bella's response was cold, calculated. Alex, dear, it's not my fault you can't keep a man interested. Maybe if you were a little less mundane. Those words, sharp and cruel, cut deeper than any physical wound. I looked at Mark, searching for something, anything that would reassure me. But all I saw was a man caught in the crossfire, unsure of his standing. In that moment, I knew what I had to do. Mark, we're done, I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. Mark's face crumpled, a mix of hurt and confusion. Alex, please, let's talk about this. But I was past talking. I turned to Bella, my former friend, now nothing more than a stranger. And you, Bella, enjoy the victory. I hope it was worth it. With those final words, I walked away, leaving behind the shattered pieces of what I once thought was unbreakable. The pain was raw, a gaping wound in my chest, but it was overshadowed by a burning determination. Bella had taken something precious from me, but she didn't realize the war she had started. I would rebuild, stronger and wiser, and when the time was right, Bella would know the true cost of her actions. The high school reunion was supposed to be a night of nostalgia, a chance to relive the carefree days of youth. Instead, it became a battleground. The moment I entered the decorated gymnasium, I knew I had walked into enemy territory. There she was, Bella, holding court in the center of the room, radiant and confident, basking in the admiration of our former classmates. The sight of her stirred a whirlwind of emotions within me, anger, betrayal, and a burning desire for retribution. I tried to keep a low profile, sticking to the fringes, but fate had other plans. Hey, Alexandra, over here! Come sit with us! Called out an old classmate, waving enthusiastically. Before I could decline, I was swept up in a tide of people and deposited right next to Bella. Her smile was a masterclass in duplicity. Alexandra, darling, it's been too long, she cooed, her eyes glinting with unspoken triumph. I forced a smile, keeping my voice even. Yes, Bella, it's been a while. The evening wore on, a parade of small talk and reminiscing. Bella played the part of the beloved high school idol flawlessly, her every word and gesture seemingly perfect, but I knew better. Beneath that polished exterior was the heart of a viper. As the conversation shifted to life updates, I braced myself. So, Alexandra, what's new with you? Still with Mark? Bella asked, her voice honeyed with false concern. The question was a knife, and she wielded it expertly. No, Bella, Mark and I are no longer together, I replied, keeping my emotions in check. Bella's expression was one of feigned shock. Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. But I'm sure a catch like you won't be single for long. Her words were a charade, a performance for the audience we had. I could feel the eyes of our classmates on us, sensing the undercurrents of tension. I'm focusing on myself right now, Bella. Relationships aren't a priority, I said, meeting her gaze steadily. Bella laughed, a sound that set my teeth on edge. Oh, Alex, always the independent one. But you know what they say, the clock is ticking. Her insinuation was clear, a barbed reminder of societal expectations. I felt a flush of anger but held it back. Now was not the time for an outburst. The night dragged on, a torturous affair of forced smiles and polite applause. As I lay in bed later that night, Bella's words echoed in my mind. She had taken pleasure in my pain, reveling in my discomfort. But as I closed my eyes, a plan began to form. Bella thought she had won, but the game was far from over. I would take my time crafting a revenge that would leave no doubt about who the true victor was. Bella had made a grave mistake in underestimating me, and she would soon learn just how costly that mistake was. The confrontation with Bella at my parents' house was unexpected and explosive. She arrived unannounced, her face twisted in a mix of anger and desperation. "What do you want, Bella?" I asked, my voice cool as I opened the door to her furious knocking. I want my money, Alexandra. The money you owe me, she spat, her eyes blazing. Confusion swept over me. Money? What are you talking about? I don't owe you anything. Don't play dumb. The $600,000 you took from Mark. You're going to pay it back. Bella's accusation was ludicrous, yet her conviction was unsettling. Bella, you've lost your mind. I never took any money from Mark, I countered, struggling to maintain my composure in the face of her absurd claim. Her laugh was bitter, filled with contempt. Oh, please. You think I don't know about the debts? Mark told me everything. You bled him dry with your extravagant lifestyle, and now I'm paying for it. The pieces clicked into place, a sickening realization dawning on me. Mark's financial troubles, which he had always been so vague about, were now being twisted into a weapon by Bella. Bella, listen to yourself. You're being played. I never took any money from Mark. This is his doing, not mine. I tried to reason with her, but my words fell on deaf ears. Save it, Alexandra. I know your type, always playing the victim. Well, not anymore. You're going to pay back every cent, or I'll make sure everyone knows what a fraud you are. Bella's threat was laced with venom, her desperation turning to malice. As she stormed off, I stood there, shaken but resolute. This was no longer just about a broken heart or a tarnished friendship. This was war. Over the next few days, I began to gather information, digging into Mark's financial history. It didn't take long to uncover a trail of deceit and manipulation. He was in deep, and he had dragged Bella down with him. Armed with this knowledge, I arranged a meeting with Bella. We met at a quiet park, away from prying eyes. She arrived, her usual confidence replaced with a wary defensiveness. Bella, I'm not here to fight. I have something you need to see, I said, extending an envelope towards her. She took it hesitantly, her eyes scanning the documents inside. As the truth dawned on her, her face paled, the realization of Mark's betrayal hitting her like a physical blow. This can't be, she stammered, her facade crumbling. I was never the enemy, Bella. It was Mark all along. He used us both, I said, not without a tinge of sympathy. For a moment there was a flicker of the old Bella, the friend I once knew, but it was quickly snuffed out, replaced by a hardened, bitter shell. This changes nothing between us, Alexandra. You may not have taken the money, but you're still the reason my life is in shambles, she said, her voice cold. As she walked away, I knew that our bridge was burnt, but I also knew that justice, in its own twisted way, had been served. Bella had been humbled, her illusions shattered, and while it brought me no joy, it was a necessary closure. I walked away from the park, a sense of finality washing over me. The chapter of Bella and Mark was closed, but my story was far from over. Life has a way of coming full circle. Standing in my new home, a modest yet cozy place filled with love and laughter, I couldn't help but reflect on the tumultuous journey that had led me here. I had moved on, found love again with someone who valued the simplicity of life as much as I did. We had a beautiful son, whose innocent laughter was a balm to the scars of my past. Yet the echoes of the past still lingered. News of Bella reached me, a bitter reminder of the storm we had weathered. Her fall from grace was as swift as it was severe. After the truth about Mark's deceit and her own misplaced accusations came to light, her life unraveled. The queen bee of our small town had lost her sting, her followers dissipating as quickly as they had gathered. I heard she moved into a small, run-down apartment, a far cry from the lavish lifestyle she once boasted. Her dreams of a grand wedding and a life of luxury with Mark had crumbled to dust, leaving her with a harsh dose of reality. I didn't take pleasure in her downfall. There was no satisfaction in seeing the once mighty Bella reduced to a shadow of her former self. If anything, it was a somber reminder of how fragile our perceptions of happiness can be. "Mommy, look!" My son's voice pulled me from my reverie, his small hands tugging at my skirt. In his hands he held a drawing, a crude depiction of our family. It was us, him, me, and my partner, all smiles and stick figures. "It's beautiful, honey," I said, scooping him into my arms. His laughter filled the room, a sound so pure and full of life. As I put him to bed that night, I realized that this was what true happiness looked like. It wasn't about status, money, or revenge. It was about the simple moments, the ones that often go unnoticed. Lying in bed, I thought about Bella one last time. Our friendship, once a source of comfort and joy, had become a battlefield of envy and betrayal. but it had also taught me valuable lessons about trust, resilience, and the power of letting go. I hoped in time Bella would find her own path to redemption. Perhaps one day she would understand that the ordinary life she once scorned was, in fact, a life filled with extraordinary moments. As I drifted off to sleep, I made a silent wish for her, a wish for peace, for growth, and for the wisdom to see the beauty in life's simplicity. The story of Bella and me was over, but my story, our story, was just beginning. Leaving work early, I couldn't shake off a nagging feeling of dread. As I, Laura Bennett, a 28-year-old part-time marketing assistant, approached my home, the unease grew. My mind was racing, but I brushed off the anxiety as a side effect of not feeling well. Little did I know that my world was about to be turned upside down. Stepping into the silent house, I felt the atmosphere shift. The home I shared with my husband Daniel felt unfamiliar, almost hostile. Driven by an inexplicable instinct, I found myself tiptoeing towards the back room where muffled voices broke the eerie silence. My heart pounded against my chest, a sense of impending doom taking hold. I hesitated at the door, my hand trembling as I reached for the knob. The voices became clearer, a man and a woman, intimately engaged in conversation. Pushing the door open just a crack, I peered inside. The sight that greeted me was like a punch to the gut. Daniel, my husband of 3 years, was entwined with a younger woman. Their laughter and affectionate whispers were a stark contrast to the coldness and distance that had crept into our marriage. I stood there, frozen, as Daniel's words sliced through the last threads of trust I had clung to. "Marrying Laura was a mistake," he said, his voice laced with contempt. "Young and beautiful is what I deserve. Isabel, you make me feel alive." Tears welled up in my eyes, but I fought them back. This was not the time for weakness. I needed to be strong, to think clearly. Quietly, I closed the door and retreated, my mind racing with the betrayal I had just witnessed. It wasn't just the affair that hurt. It was the realization that the man I loved saw me as nothing more than a mistake. As I made my way to the living room, a plan began to take shape in my mind. I needed evidence, something concrete to expose them for what they were. It wasn't about revenge, it was about justice. No, who was I kidding? It was about both. I knew I had to be careful, to play my cards right. Daniel was a lawyer, cunning and persuasive. I couldn't confront him without solid proof, so I decided to gather evidence of his infidelity. It was time for me to step out of the shadows and take control of my life. In the days that followed, I became a silent observer in my own home, collecting pieces of their betrayal. Text messages, late-night calls, the subtle changes in Daniel's behavior, everything was a clue, a piece of the puzzle I was putting together. I was no longer the trusting, naive wife. I was a woman on a mission, a woman wronged, ready to strike back. As I lay in bed each night, planning my next move, I realized this was more than just about exposing Daniel and Isabel. This was about reclaiming my life, my dignity. I was ready to face the storm. I had to be. When Daniel and I first met, it felt like a scene out of a romantic movie. He was a charismatic lawyer, and I, a marketing assistant, found myself drawn to his confidence and charm. Our courtship was a whirlwind, filled with laughter, deep conversations, and promises of a future together. We married within a year, a decision that seemed right at the time, but now felt like a hasty mistake. Our married life began like a dream. Daniel was attentive, caring, and seemed genuinely interested in my life, but as the months passed, the facade began to crumble. He became more absorbed in his work, often returning late, and our conversations dwindled to mundane exchanges. One evening, as we sat in silence over dinner, I attempted to bridge the growing gap between us. "Daniel, we barely talk anymore. Is everything okay at work?" I asked, reaching for his hand. He withdrew his hand and replied coldly, "Work is fine, Laura. I'm just tired. You wouldn't understand the pressure I'm under." His words stung, creating a rift that only grew with time. As Daniel's detachment increased, so did my workload at home and the office. I tried to compensate for his absence by keeping the house perfect and excelling at my job, hoping it would bring back the man I fell in love with. Then came the day that marked the beginning of the end. Daniel, in a rare moment of candor, shared his thoughts on our marriage. "Laura, you know I love you, but I feel like you're not pulling your weight financially. I'm carrying the burden of our expenses, and it's not fair." His words felt like a slap. I had been contributing as much as I could from my part-time job, cutting back on personal expenses to support our household. But Daniel, I've been trying my best. I'm already stretched thin between work and home, I protested. Daniel scoffed. Your best isn't good enough. Maybe if you worked harder or got a better job, we wouldn't be in this situation. His dismissive attitude left me reeling. I thought of the late nights, the unending household chores, and the sacrifices I had made for our marriage. It was clear that my efforts and my love were not enough for him. That night, I lay awake, contemplating our relationship. The man I married, the man I thought would be my partner in life, had become a stranger. His words echoed in my head, a constant reminder of the growing void between us. The seeds of doubt and resentment took root, setting the stage for the inevitable confrontation that would change everything. The days following that conversation felt like walking through a minefield. Daniel's indifference towards me grew, and with it my sense of isolation. I started to dread his return home each evening, not knowing which version of him I'd face, the cold, distant husband, or the one who saw me as a financial burden. One particularly tense evening, Daniel arrived home earlier than usual. I greeted him with a cautious optimism, hoping for a semblance of the warmth we once shared. "You're home early, is everything okay?" I asked. Daniel's response was curt, his eyes void of any warmth. "I left early to talk about something important. We need to discuss our finances again." His tone was not inviting a conversation, but demanding a resolution. I felt a knot form in my stomach. "What about our finances?" I inquired, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's about the mortgage, Laura. I'm not okay with shouldering most of the burden. You need to contribute more." His words were like daggers, undermining my efforts and sacrifices. I couldn't contain my frustration. "I'm already giving nearly all of my income towards the mortgage, Daniel. How much more do you expect me to contribute?" My voice was a mix of anger and desperation. Daniel leaned back, his expression one of annoyance. "That's not enough. You should consider increasing your work hours or finding a higher-paying job. Being cooped up at home isn't good for anyone." His suggestion hit me like a wave of ice-cold water. "Increase my work hours? I'm already struggling to balance my job with the housework you leave entirely to me." Daniel stood up, his demeanor turning hostile. "That's your job, Laura. I'm out working all day, earning for us. It's only fair you take care of the house, and frankly, you're not even doing a great job at that." I was stunned into silence. His words were not just hurtful. They were a complete dismissal of everything I had been doing for us, for our home. It was clear that in his eyes I was failing at being a wife, a partner. As he walked away, leaving me standing there, a mix of hurt and anger bubbling inside me, I knew something had to change. I couldn't continue living like this, constantly demeaned and undervalued. The man I married was gone, replaced by this cold, unfeeling stranger. That night, as I lay in bed, the weight of his words crushing me, I realized that my marriage was not just strained, it was broken, and I was the only one trying to fix it. It was time to stop. It was time to start thinking about myself, about my worth. And most importantly, it was time to start planning my escape from this toxic relationship. The days blurred together in a haze of resentment and disbelief. Daniel's demands and coldness continued, each word chipping away at the last remnants of our marriage. Then, one fateful day, I stumbled upon a truth that would change everything. I arrived home from work, expecting the usual empty house, only to find Daniel's car in the driveway. Confused, I entered quietly, only to hear laughter from the living room, a sound so rare in our home nowadays. Peering around the corner, my heart stopped. There was Daniel, cozy and relaxed, with Isabel, the same woman I had seen him with that day. Suppressing the urge to confront them, I retreated to the kitchen, my mind racing. This was no casual visit. The intimacy between them was palpable, undeniable. And then it hit me. Isabel wasn't just a fling, she was a full-blown affair. Later that evening, after Isabel had left, I faced Daniel. "Who is Isabel, really?" "She seems more than just a friend," I asked, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. Daniel's reaction was swift and dismissive. "She's just a colleague. Don't make a big deal out of it, Laura." But I knew better. The way he avoided my gaze, the tension in his voice, it was all too clear. Daniel was lying, and I was done being the fool. That night, I lay in bed, my mind made up. I needed proof of his betrayal, something concrete to expose him and free myself from this sham of a marriage. My plan was simple, yet risky. I would record their encounters, gather evidence of the affair. Over the next few weeks, I became a shadow in my own home, watching, waiting. The opportunity came sooner than expected. One afternoon, I returned home to find them together again. This time, I was prepared. With my phone discreetly positioned, I recorded their intimate conversation, their plans, their betrayal. As I listened to the recording later, a mix of sorrow and rage washed over me. But there was also a sense of empowerment. I had the evidence I needed. It was time to act, to end this farce and reclaim my dignity. With each step of my plan, a sense of clarity and determination grew within me. This was not just about revenge, it was about justice. For too long I had been a spectator in my own life, but no more. I was ready to face Daniel and Isabel, to expose their deceit. It was time for them to face the consequences of their actions. Armed with the evidence of Daniel's infidelity, I felt a newfound strength. It was no longer about salvaging a broken marriage, it was about exposing the truth and getting justice. But first, I needed an ally, someone who would be as impacted by this revelation as I was. My opportunity came unexpectedly. While going through Daniel's phone one evening, I discovered that Isabel was not only married, but her husband, James, was a prominent client of Daniel's firm. This was more than just personal. It was a professional bombshell that would have far-reaching consequences. I contacted James, introducing myself as Daniel's wife, and requesting a meeting under the guise of discussing an urgent matter about our spouses. We met at a quiet cafe, away from prying eyes. The look on James's face when I revealed the affair was a mixture of shock, anger, and betrayal. James's reaction was visceral. "Isabel and your husband? This is unbelievable. How long has this been going on?" he demanded, his voice shaking with emotion. I shared the evidence, watching as his face contorted with pain and fury. I had my suspicions, but this is concrete proof. She's betrayed me, and with your husband, no less. The plan was set into motion. James would confront Isabel and I would confront Daniel, both of us armed with the undeniable truth. It was a risky move, but I was past caring. I wanted to see Daniel's facade crumble, to watch him face the consequences of his actions. The confrontation with Daniel was cathartic. I watched as his face turned pale, his usual confident demeanor crumbling under the weight of his exposed secrets. "Laura, this isn't what it looks like. We can talk about this," he stammered, his voice betraying his panic. "No, Daniel, there's nothing left to talk about. I know everything. And so does James," I replied, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. The fallout was swift and devastating. James filed for divorce and cut all personal and professional ties with Daniel. Isabel's world came crashing down, and Daniel's career took a massive hit. But for me, it was a bittersweet victory. I had exposed them, but at the cost of my own marriage and the life I thought I had. As I watched Daniel's life unravel, I felt a sense of closure. It was a harsh lesson, but one that freed me from the chains of a loveless marriage. I was ready to move on, to rebuild my life on my terms. In the aftermath of the confrontation, the reality of my situation began to sink in. I watched as Daniel's meticulously constructed world fell apart. The man who once held himself with unshakable confidence was now a shadow of his former self, reeling from the impact of his own actions. The final blow came during a tense meeting at our lawyer's office to discuss the divorce proceedings. Daniel, looking defeated, tried to salvage what little he could from the ruins of his life. "Look, Laura, can't we sort this out amicably? Think about what you're doing here. This will ruin both our lives," Daniel pleaded, his voice laced with desperation. I looked at him, feeling a mixture of pity and revulsion. "Amicable? After what you did? You didn't think of our lives when you were with Isabel. It's too late for regrets, Daniel." Our lawyer, a stoic man, handed Daniel the divorce papers. "The terms are clear. Given the circumstances, there will be no alimony. You'll also need to agree on the division of assets." Daniel's face contorted in anger. "This is ridiculous. I earned most of this. She doesn't deserve half of my assets." I remained calm, my resolve unshaken. "I don't want your money, Daniel. I want my freedom. And you can keep your assets. I'm starting anew, far from the shadow of your deceit." The divorce was finalized swiftly. Daniel's career continued to spiral downward as the scandal became public knowledge. Isabel, on the other hand, faced her own set of consequences. Her marriage to James ended in a bitter divorce, and she was left to grapple with the social and professional fallout of her actions. As for me, I emerged from the chaos with a sense of liberation. I had lost my marriage, but I gained something far more valuable: my self-respect and independence. I sold the house, a place that once symbolized our shared dreams, and moved into a modest apartment, embracing my new beginning. My days were no longer filled with the dread of Daniel's return or the anguish of his betrayal. Instead, I focused on rebuilding my life, rediscovering my passions, and reconnecting with old friends. The experience had changed me, but it also strengthened me. I realized that life often throws unexpected challenges our way, and how we respond to them defines us. I chose to stand up for myself, to fight back against betrayal and deceit, and in doing so, I found a resilience I never knew I had.